Hello, everybody. I assume that we are now live, but I still have to edit what we have so that it doesn't say that we are painting Roxolana. Okay, so I put in a description for that, and the description says makes art improve, and the answer is not money. Okay, so in the news lately, there's been a lot about how art is a good way to divert violence and make students thrive, and especially students from bad families or bad neighborhoods. And therefore, obviously, the thing that the liberal people who are supporting this are saying is invest in the arts, invest in music education, invest in art education. And then they end up saying weird things like this: make the school day longer, keep the children there for at least 8 hours, like a whole work day. And that way there can be an art program, for instance, or a music program. And, you know, it's not that I am not for the arts. It's that I honestly think that in order to improve in art, you need time for art. And if you're in school, whatever it is you're learning, even if you're learning art skills, that isn't art, because whenever you're given an assignment and you have to do it and it doesn't come from within you, you're not being pushed from within to express something. You're being compelled from without to do something. That is not art. That's work. And there's a huge difference between art and work. Work is something that you have external motivation to do, and art is something that you have an internal motive for. I'm going to go talk to my birds for a bit, and I'll be right back. All right. So I have been painting a lot lately, and I've seen an improvement. And I'm not getting any kind of monetary reward. I'm not getting a grade for doing it. But I think that everybody who has some kind of internal motive is a person who gets better. So have I improved? Yes. Am I on a professional level? Absolutely not. But I want to show you something. I'm going to show you an old piece of mine. This is what I painted when I was about 14 years old. And I don't know if you can tell what it is. It looks very abstract, doesn't it? I'm going to put it here behind me so you can see the whole thing. It's very abstract. Some people have asked me, is this a painting of a Chinese woman? Well, it's not. It's my model for this was Arlene Martel, who played T'Pring on Star Trek. And I was compelled to paint her. I was at the time taking painting lessons, so I knew the basics of how to make an acrylic painting, but I wasn't very good. And I wanted to do portraits. And my teacher told me, you can't yet. You're not good enough. Well, so this is not about not taking criticism well, but anyway, I kept on doing landscapes in her class, but at home, I got some supplies and I started painting what I wanted to paint. And of course, she was right. I wasn't good enough. And I looked at that and I said, oh my God, I'm not good enough. Okay. The thing is, I did get better at landscapes, but I didn't like it. It wasn't fun for me. So eventually I realized I wasn't very good at art. And I decided to put most of my energy into writing because I'm better at writing. Okay. But guess what? Every time I had an emotional crisis of some sort that couldn't be resolved with writing, I went back to art. And of course, I didn't go back to drawing peaceful landscapes. I always attempted to do portraits because something inside me gives me some kind of reward for doing a portrait, which it just doesn't give me for a landscape, even if my landscape is better than my portrait. I'm going to call that dopamine. I'm not sure if that's the right neurotransmitter or not, but just to make it simple, I'm going to say that I am rewarded for my art with dopamine. And so even though I have never, well, occasionally I got commissioned. I got commissioned once to do a landscape a very long time ago when I was a young girl, and I do appreciate the person who did that for me. And another time I did a gigantic painting of a narrative scene with many, many, many faces on it. And somebody bought my painting, but it was a family member. So I have been rewarded occasionally, but I can't make a living by selling art. And I know that. Deep down inside, I know that that will never happen. Okay? It's just not going to happen. So the question is, why do I keep doing it, even though I'm not good enough now, wasn't good enough then? And the answer is because there's an internal reward. And a lot of these people who are saying fund the art programs are saying this because the internal reward also quiets people down. So, instead of going out and killing someone, they will paint something or something of that sort. I think that's the motive for funding of the arts. But the thing is, if you are internally invested in your art, you don't need any funding. It's all about return on investment. So I want to now show you the painting that I did at 14 or thereabouts. I'm not sure what the date on it is because it does not in fact say. Maybe I'll do it like this. And then I'll show you my latest Roxolana. So you can see that Roxolana is also imperfect, but it's much better and it's much smaller. See how much smaller? I now have control over my paintbrush to such an extent that I can paint a much more accurate looking portrait, a much more semi-realistic looking portrait on a much smaller surface without any instruction. In other words, I never got more art lessons after I learned, the basics of how to use acrylics. And I did not spend years and years practicing either. You know, after I painted this, I went to college, I went to law school, I practiced law, I went back to school, got a PhD in linguistics. I taught at the university level. I had a daughter. I raised a chimpanzee and taught him language. And occasionally, whenever there was a crisis, I would paint. And when there wasn't one, I wouldn't. And so that's about it. That's what's going on with this. And this is after a lifetime of occasionally painting, not painting all the time. I have gotten to this level, okay? Which is not a professional level either. But it's much better, I think. All I can say is I believe that I have improved. And I will also tell you this. It wasn't praise that fueled my improvement. It wasn't money that fueled my improvement. It was having the time and having the internal need to do this that made me get better at it. Okay? So this is where I get very confused when other people are talking about the arts and how they need to be funded. And I just think that those people who are going to be doing art are doing it despite what they are funded to do, not because of what they're funded to do. That's any of us. And it doesn't matter whether we're really good at it or really bad at it. That's not what I'm saying. I have no belief that I will ever get to any high level of art that would be of value to all of humanity or something like that. But nevertheless, I have seen a drastic improvement in my art over a lifetime, fueled, I think, by dopamine. I really think that it was my internal reward that made me keep trying for that, and not any reward from any person or thing. So I do think I would like to share this. And let me see if I can. But stay with me because I have more to say about this. Okay, so I am now going to share this. On my other channel. Okay. And while I'm sharing it, so I'm sharing it to share this. Oh dear. Let me just check and make sure that we don't. Wow, it just keeps going, doesn't it? I'm going to see whether we have any kind of comments. Well, I don't see any, so we'll just keep going. Here's what I think. There are children who are rich and are being forced into programs that teach them things that they believe, their parents believe, will make them succeed in life. There are children who are poor and who are being herded into Head Start programs very early in life, taken away from their parents and their loving environment, and fueled by a liberal belief that education, which means taking away from the family and giving to the community, is the way to better the condition of children whose families are not wealthy. And I think in both cases, among those children, there will be those who will get a dopamine rush from artistic endeavor. That means that on the edges of their notebook paper, no matter what they're asked to do, whether they're being asked to do math or science, or they're being asked to write a composition in English, what they really want to do is draw. And so there will be caricatures, there will be pictures, there will be doodles on the sides of their paper. And they'll get that in because that is what their internal reward system is going to have them doing. And when you're educating people against their will, every one of them is going to do what their internal reward system pays them to do. Those who particularly, I think, benefit from being educated away from home are those whose dopamine system is very social. So when their internal reward system is actually based on doing well in a group of people, and I don't know if that's dopamine or serotonin. It could be that some people are dopamine rewarded and others are serotonin rewarded, but there will be some who will learn to climb very high in every social ladder, and they'll have internal reward for that, and they'll be very glad to be in this more social situation with many, many people from different backgrounds, etc. But on the sidelights, there will be people who are much more internally motivated to seek satisfaction from science, art, literature, whatever. And they're going to be pursuing that despite what they're rewarded for with grades and praise and everything of that sort. So to me, I always did better outside of an instruction program than I did in one, because I was able to pursue the thing for which I was given an internal reward. And it's not about being, perfect or even being a genius or a prodigy. I'm not any of those things, certainly not in art. You might even say that I'm backwards in art. I have 2 left hands, I have, stubby fingers, and I don't control things very well. And so I've never seemed very artistic to people who gave me tasks such as color within the lines in the coloring book. If you judged me on that, I was the worst one in the class, always, always, always. But when I get my internal motivation, I can work on something and I can learn to improve, not necessarily to a level that is satisfactory to anybody else, but is, it's just better. It's not best, but it's better. I think that's true of everyone in every subject, but particularly in the arts, I think you need a lot of alone time. You need a lot of time to grapple with your own disabilities and deficits and lack of skill, and to learn the skills that you find are necessary to achieve whatever result that you are looking for. I don't really think that by herding children into public programs in which public money is being diverted into the program, you're going to get better artists, better musicians, or better anything like that. It's outside those programs, on the edges, that those who are really going to be better at it are going to thrive. And even those of us who aren't so good, like myself, can find peace and contentment in pursuing their not so great talent, and in an environment in which they can have internal reward for their own progress at whatever rate they're going. But if you don't believe me about this, I mean, there's a child prodigy that's on YouTube. I think her name is Akiana. And the things that she says about how her art is inspired by God and whatever, I take with a grain of salt. But I have looked at her art. It is really great. And I've listened to the story, and the story is that when her parents saw how motivated she was, this little girl, to paint, they took away the prison of the school that she had to go to and just allowed her to paint 24/7 because that's what she wanted to do. She had that internal reward for it, and the return on investment in terms of her ability and learning was great. But I just want to make it clear that I'm not even speaking about situations where the question is, do you send a child to public school or do you homeschool? Let's say that you are invested in sending your child to a school away from home. In other words, you think a good, solid education in reading, writing, arithmetic, the sciences, mathematics is a good thing. Well, I have the example of the schools in Israel right before Israel became a state and a little bit after it became a state. And children used to go to school, I think in my mother's day, for about 4 hours from 8 to 12. By the time I was in elementary school in Israel, I think it went afternoon. So I remember that we ate our lunches. By the way, there was no lunchroom. We just ate our lunches at our desks. But I think we returned home early in the afternoon around 1 o'clock. So it was like 8 to 1 when I was 8 and 9 years old in Israel. And of course, we were reading the Hebrew Bible with, in the original. We were asked to do some pretty high skilled things, but nobody thought they had to keep us there all day or that our education would be better if we were there all day, which meant in the afternoon, I had time to draw, I had time to write, and each person, each child had time to pursue whatever it is that they were internally motivated to do. Now, when I came to the United States, permanently when I was 10 years old in 5th grade, we were there in school from between something like 8 to 3:30, something like that. So it's quite a bit longer. But these people right now who are writing about how we need to make the school day longer are talking about, a 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 type of arrangement or even later. And when I talk to them about it and say, but if you have them in that environment for that long, they won't have any time for their real artistic endeavors, to actually create something, to do creative writing, to paint something that they weren't assigned to paint and they're not getting a grade on. And I think that we learn the most when we're allowed to pursue our own interests. I can understand that there might be a skill set that we want everybody to attain to. Everybody should know how to read and write. Everybody should know math. I can understand that a lot of people at least think that. And they think that a basic education in a public school is great. I'm not going to argue about that here, but why would you want to keep them there all day? So I talked to my mom and I told her about this, and she said, oh, that's because they want free babysitting. That's why they're doing it. But I don't know. I've spoken to other people online who actually seem to think that it's not babysitting, that they're liberating these children from their families of origin because they really hate their families. And they think their families are forcing older children to take care of younger children and do the chores and wash the dishes. And they think if they keep them in school longer, they'll have time for art because they would not have time for art at home. But I think there's a mistaken notion there, even if you hate the family of origin of a particular child. Um, the children at school who are artistic are finding ways to be artistic in the margins. They're doodling. Uh, they're getting their art in any way they can, and usually they're getting downgraded for that. They're being told, don't do that, don't doodle, work on your math, work on this, whatever it is the teacher wants you to work on, that's what you're supposed to be working on. And so they have to rebel against their teachers in order to get the art in. Now let's talk about a child in the family where there aren't a lot of resources. A lot of people said to me, well, there's no room. There's no art room in their house. Oh, good grief. Do you think I have an art room in my house? I move the art around in my house from one room to the next, depending on what I'm doing. When I'm doing art, it's in between all the other jobs that I have to do. Okay. And that's what most of us do. So if there is a child who is forced to take care of younger siblings, don't you think that their ability to be in charge, to be the oldest one there, also allows them to find some marginal time in which to doodle, maybe, on paper sacks or in the trash can or by painting on the walls of their house or whatever. It's not the money, it's the time. Let's talk about this really. The thing that limits the achievements of all of us, great or small, is that we don't have enough time. We come into this world and then we go out of this world, and the time that we have in it is more important than any money we earn or any reward that we're given externally. And the pursuit of happiness is something that only the individual can determine how to do. You're not going to save someone from being told what to do by kidnapping them from their family, where admittedly sometimes they're told what to do, and putting them in a school environment where they're told what to do by a stranger. And this assumption that the stranger is going to be kinder than the family member, even in a poor family, I think is a mistaken notion. So what can you do? Follow your heart when you can do it. Find time when you can do it. Telling people that they have to work all the time, whether it is for the state to pay for their health insurance or, that they should be involved in some sort of community project. All of these things take away from the time in which your own internal reward system can help you get this to this and beyond. So I'm still on my journey through life, and I really think it does matter. We should pay attention to our internal reward system and the internal reward system of every child. And we can't do it by funding or stealing money or time away from anyone. And anytime you tell a child he has to stay late at school in order to supposedly help him, you're not helping him. It's different if you say, keep some art rooms open so that children who want to can stay late after school, but it's a voluntary thing. And it's a completely different thing to say, take that little girl who would have been writing and painting on her own and make her stay longer and longer at school as if it were a job. That's really mean. It's cruel, and you guys have to know it. And just a side note, I've been watching Anne with an E, and it seems to have come to some kind of a closing. Anne and Gilbert know they love each other. They've all gone to college. But there was this native uh, native girl, Indian, whether you like that word or not, who was kidnapped by, I don't know, people at a Catholic school, but with the aid of the government. And their purpose was to cause her to assimilate, and her parents didn't want that. And that particular plot was left hanging. I might be missing something, but at the same time as liberals tell you that you should invest in art programs at school and take poor children away from their families, they are also talking about how the state kidnaps children and tries to assimilate them to the mainstream culture. I think that's a little bit weird. Yes, it's not right to take children away from their parents and try to cause them to be assimilated. But what in the world do all of you pro art people mean when you want to take a child and make that child stay at school for the entire school day? If they speak a different language at home, don't you think they're going to lose that language? Think about that. Okay. And at this point, I will bid you a good day. And I hope I've given you something to think about.